In most neighborhoods, conflict means a passive-aggressive note about your trash cans or a dirty look at the HOA meeting. But in Aspen Falls, the fight for peace and privacy came with bylaws, fake authority, and one very unexpected ally. This isn't a story about war, not the kind with weapons anyway. It's about silence, defiance, and the quiet man at the end of the cul-de-sac who just wanted to be left alone. But when power crossed the line, into his home, into his sanctuary, it didn't expect what it would find waiting in the basement. Some say strength is loud, obvious. But sometimes, it's 850 pounds of fur and calm. And sometimes, justice has claws. Elias Cross had never planned to live in a neighborhood like Aspen Falls. The homes were too clean, the sidewalks too straight, and the air too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet he'd once cherished deep in the mountains of Montana, but the kind of silence that came from overregulation, like everyone was afraid to exhale too loudly. It had been 14 months since Eli resigned from the FBI. 14 months since the hostage standoff in Phoenix that ended with 3 innocents dead and a career cut short. His superiors called it unavoidable. Eli called it something else, something heavier, something that clotted him in his sleep. He didn't miss the job. He missed the clarity it gave him, the clean edge of purpose. After everything, he wanted peace, solitude, stability. Instead, he got the HOA. He found the house on the edge of the community, away from the pristine cul-de-sacs and weekly garden competitions. It had a fenced yard, a reinforced basement, and just enough space for him and the only living thing he trusted without reservation, Ursa, an 850-pound North American brown bear who had once saved his life, literally and metaphorically. He'd rescued her as a cub years earlier, after stumbling on an illegal hunting site during a solo retreat in Glacier National Park. Her mother was dead, the cub barely breathing. Eli carried her in his arms for 10 miles to a ranger station and never let her go again. Over the years, through proper training, permits, and relentless inspections, Ursa became more than an animal. She became his grounding force. Aspen Falls had no laws against exotic animals, as long as federal and state permits were in place. Eli had every document in order. The basement had been remodeled into a reinforced habitat with a climate control system, 2 security doors, cameras, and fire suppression systems. It was safer than most zoos. But Eli knew people, and people feared what they didn't understand, especially people like Patricia Kessler. Patricia had been HOA president for 8 consecutive years, a widow with no children, and an iron will polished by a career in bureaucratic city planning. She saw the neighborhood not as a community, but as a legacy. She enforced bylaws with religious fervor. She once issued a warning citation because a resident's tulips bloomed out of season. She had a private email chain with drone footage of potential violations and a laminated copy of the HOA charter that she carried in her purse like scripture. To her, Eli was an anomaly, a man with no Facebook profile, who didn't show up to town halls, who ignored block parties and had blackout curtains in a zip code where open-concept living was practically mandatory. To her, Eli wasn't just suspicious, he was dangerous. That Saturday, the temperature crept just above 80, and Eli sat in his backyard reading a tattered copy of Call of the Wild, sipping coffee in complete silence. The neighborhood buzzed faintly in the distance. Lawnmowers, sprinklers, a kid laughing before being quickly shushed. It was almost enough to let him breathe. Until his phone pinged. Unknown number. No text. Just a still image. It was a photo of his back fence, taken from inside his property. The camera angle was unfamiliar, not from one of his own surveillance feeds. The timestamp was from that morning. Someone had been watching. He stood, heart already racing, and scanned the perimeter. Nothing moved. But the quiet now felt sharp, like the moment before a gunshot. That night, after double-checking locks and reviewing footage that showed nothing out of the ordinary, Eli sat on the basement steps beside Ursa's enclosure. The bear stirred, yawned deeply, and pressed her snout toward the fence for a soft bump against his boot. "You ever feel like trouble walks in just to see if we'll flinch?" he asked her. She grunted and went back to sleep. The next day, it arrived. A knock, loud, sharp, rhythmic, rattled the front door. Not the casual kind of knock you give a neighbor. The kind used by someone who expects authority to do the talking. Eli opened the door to find Patricia, flanked by a man with a clipboard and another with a camera slung around his neck. Her face was all smile and no warmth. "Mr. Cross," she said, her voice honeyed with superiority. "We're conducting a routine compliance walkthrough. Section 8. 4. Permits surprise inspections in cases of suspected structural violations. Please step aside." Eli didn't move. "You're not law enforcement." "No," she said, brushing past him anyway. "But I am the elected authority here." The two men followed like trained dogs. By the time Eli realized where they were heading, the basement door was already open. The moment Patricia Kessler's loafers hit the bottom step of Elias Cross's basement, the temperature shifted. Cooler, denser, unnervingly still. Her eyes took a second to adjust. What she saw didn't make sense at first. A large, reinforced enclosure sat under industrial lights, enclosed by heavy-gauge steel fencing. Motion sensors on the corners, 2 electronic locks, and ventilation humming from an overhead duct. A small red cooler sat nearby, filled with fresh fruit and sealed protein packs. But her eyes weren't on the structure. They were on the creature inside. Ursa rose slowly, unbothered, as though waking from a particularly cozy nap. Her body stretched as she stood on all fours, nearly 5 feet at the shoulder, her thick brown coat catching the artificial light like polished mahogany. Her face, blunt and broad, turned toward Patricia, and she blinked slowly. Patricia froze. Her mouth opened, but the scream caught halfway in her throat. "What? What is that?" she gasped, stumbling backward into a metal shelving unit. A bucket clattered loudly to the floor. Eli reached the bottom step, just in time to see her panic reach full bloom. "Her name is Ursa," he said calmly, stepping between her and the enclosure. "And before you say another word, she's here legally." You're harboring a wild animal in a residential neighborhood," she shrieked, pointing like a schoolteacher catching a child smoking behind the gym. "This violates everything. Everything. I'll have the board evict you by sundown." Eli didn't flinch. He opened a drawer from the basement cabinet and pulled out a binder. A heavy-duty, tab-divided folder labeled Permits, USDA, FL State, Aspen County. "She's fully licensed, microchipped, cleared by the USDA, the state, and the county. You're welcome to read it, if reading is something you do before calling animal control." Patricia's face flushed with a mix of indignation and fear. "This is completely unacceptable. You've endangered every family in this community." "Actually," Eli said, his voice low, "I just stopped someone from walking straight into her enclosure while she was sleeping. That someone was you." The clipboard man had taken a half step forward, but seeing the bear move again, he stayed glued to the far wall. The photographer just stood slack-jawed, the camera lowered, eyes wide. Neither had signed up for this. Patricia clutched her purse like a shield. "I'm calling a special session with the board. We will pursue legal action immediately. You'll be removed, I promise you that." "You entered my home without permission," Eli replied, folding his arms. "You opened a closed door to a private basement, and I have the security footage to prove it." That gave her pause, only for a heartbeat, but it was there. "I acted in the interest of community safety." "You acted out of control," he said evenly, "and that's the last thing you'll have over me." Patricia stormed up the stairs, muttering about lawsuits and liability and non-domestic threats, her 2 shadows trailing behind her. Eli stood alone for a moment in the quiet that followed, his chest still tight with tension. Ursa returned to her bedding and flopped onto her side, already halfway back to sleep. "You okay?" Eli murmured, kneeling beside the enclosure. The bear let out a huff. He sighed and ran a hand down his face. This wasn't just an invasion of space. It was a declaration. Patricia had made the first move. And now, whatever quiet life Eli had hoped for in Aspen Falls was gone. He climbed the stairs, closed the door behind him, and locked it tight. Then, he went to the living room, pulled up the security footage on his monitor, and saved it to 2 separate USB drives. One for safekeeping, one for the sheriff. He made the call. "Sheriff Atwell," he said when the line picked up. "This is Elias Cross over on Briar Ridge Way. I've got a trespassing incident you're going to want to see." The sheriff responded like a man used to HOA politics turning sour. "Is this about a fence height again?" "No, sir," Eli said. "This time it's about a woman who broke into my house and walked into a bear enclosure." There was a pause on the line. "A bear enclosure," Eli exhaled. "Yeah, it's a long story." By Monday morning, the footage had made the rounds. Not because Eli shared it, he hadn't, but because Aspen Falls had ears in every window and eyes behind every curtain. One of Patricia's tag-alongs, either the clipboard man or the shaky-handed photographer, had leaked a short clip to the neighborhood Facebook group. It wasn't much, just a door opening, Patricia confidently descending a flight of stairs, and Eli's quiet "she's licensed" echoing faintly from the basement. But it was enough. Enough to stir gossip. Enough to snap the community's rigid silence in half. By noon, Eli's inbox had 17 messages from neighbors. Some were cautiously worded inquiries. "Hi, Elias. Just wondering if you've had any unusual guests lately. Also, do you own a pet bear?" Others were more honest. "You're telling me Karen Kessler broke into your house, screamed at your bear, and now wants to press charges? Please let this be true." And a few were downright enthusiastic. "Can I meet the bear?" Eli ignored most of them. He wasn't in it for the attention. He just wanted the truth on record, and Patricia held accountable. The sheriff's office moved quickly. Sheriff Atwell was an older man with a gut like a beer barrel, and a face that had spent more time squinting into trouble than smiling out of it. He'd seen his fair share of HOA meltdowns over mailbox color schemes and trash bin violations, but nothing like this. "This woman broke into your house," he said flatly, staring at the paused footage on Eli's monitor. "Walked through your kitchen, opened an interior door, and entered a restricted, legally permitted enclosure." "That's right. With a bear inside," Eli nodded. "Son of a—" Atwell sat back in his chair, his hat in his lap. "And she's the one trying to make you look like the threat?" "She's good at flipping narratives," Eli said. "I've dealt with her type before. She's got paperwork, backup, and plausible deniability." "Yeah, well," the sheriff grunted, "so do I." He took the footage, copies of the permits, and Eli's formal statement. Within the hour, a civil violation for trespassing had been filed against Patricia Kessler. But the neighborhood had already taken its stance. That evening, at a hastily scheduled HOA board meeting, residents crowded into the community clubhouse with a level of tension that usually required blackout curtains and strong wine. Patricia sat at the head of the table, hands clasped, expression icy but tight around the edges. "This is a smear campaign," she began, her voice firm. "Mr. Cross is harboring a dangerous, exotic predator. I was conducting a safety inspection to protect this community. If anything, I should be commended." "Commended for breaking into someone's house?" someone called from the back. Patricia's gaze narrowed. "I acted within the scope of—" "You acted like a lunatic," snapped Ms. Grayson, a kindergarten teacher who'd lived on Maple Loop for 17 years. "I've had to hide my wind chimes for 3 summers because of you. Now you're trying to evict a guy for owning a legally documented bear?" "She could have hurt the bear," muttered someone else. Patricia's face flushed. "He is putting children at risk. Our bylaws don't mean squat when you break the law to enforce them," boomed Mr. Taylor, a retired firefighter. "You were trespassing. That's a felony, not a neighborhood rule." The board tried to maintain order. But it was too late. For the first time in HOA history, Patricia was losing control. Eli watched it unfold from his porch, headphones on, Ursa snoring faintly beneath his feet through the basement floor. He hadn't attended the meeting. He didn't need to. Sometimes the storm stirs itself. But the next day, things escalated. At 7:46 a.m., a white van with tinted windows pulled into his driveway. No logo, no plates. A man stepped out in dark slacks and a blue blazer, carrying a clipboard and wearing sunglasses despite the heavy clouds. Eli stepped outside calmly, coffee in hand. "Can I help you?" "Elias Cross?" the man asked. "That's me." "You've been served." He handed over a thick envelope. Eli opened it. A civil suit. Filed by Patricia Kessler. Charges: negligent endangerment, emotional distress, and violation of residential zoning ordinances. "Of course," Eli muttered. The man was already gone. He stared at the pages in his hand, letting the weight of the moment settle over him. He'd seen it coming, knew it was possible. But knowing didn't stop the sting. He flipped to the final page. It was signed by her attorney, a local name, notorious for ambulance chasing and HOA drama. Eli had seen guys like him before, loud in court, quiet under pressure. He exhaled and turned back inside. Time to fight back. Eli didn't sleep the night after receiving the lawsuit. He wasn't nervous. He was calculating. Years in the wilderness had trained him to act before panic had a chance to settle in. By sunrise, he'd called his attorney in Tampa, Marisol Vega, a relentless litigator with a reputation for dismantling HOA overreach and a spine made of steel. By noon, she was sitting in his kitchen, coffee untouched, reading the complaint in silence. She finally looked up. "She claims she feared for her life, but walked into your home and into your basement, uninvited, on camera?" Eli nodded. "And your bear made no aggressive movements?" "None," he said. Ursa yawned and rolled over. "That's it." Marisol smirked. "That's going to play great in front of a judge." She flipped to the back of the complaint and tapped a line with her pen. "This clause here, zoning ordinance, she's misreading it. Your enclosure was pre-approved under the county's exotic animal residential clause. The board has no authority to override it." "I figured," Eli said. "But Patricia's not trying to win. She's trying to drain me. She wants to make it messy, so I'll give up and leave." "Well," Marisol said, closing the folder, "let's give her the opposite." Over the next week, the case evolved into something far bigger than a neighborly dispute. Local media picked it up first. Bear in the basement, suburban standoff escalates. Then a regional wildlife conservation group issued a public statement supporting Eli and praising his care of Ursa. Videos of Ursa yawning, rolling, and eating frozen blueberries began circulating on social media, with captions like, "This bear has better manners than our HOA president." But for Eli, the support only made him more focused. He spent his days preparing, gathering documentation, vet reports, USDA letters, past HOA correspondence, all organized into color-coded binders, the military part of his brain reawakening with the rhythm of strategy. He even installed an extra security camera near the basement, just in case. One night, around 2:00 a.m., it caught something. A shadowed figure moving across his backyard. Eli rewound the footage 3 times. The shape was slim, hooded, moving low. Not Patricia. It looked like a teen, maybe 2. They stayed near the enclosure's outer fence, peering through the brush. He made a note to inform the sheriff, but didn't call immediately. The kids didn't touch anything. Still, the message was clear. The story had made him a curiosity, and curiosity attracted danger. The next morning, he put up a new sign. Licensed wildlife habitat, no trespassing, audio, video monitoring in use. He wasn't bluffing. Back at the HOA, things weren't going well for Patricia. Her grip was slipping fast. Board members, who had once nodded obediently, were now speaking up during meetings, asking inconvenient questions. Why weren't we consulted before legal action was taken? Why is the HOA spending community funds on your lawsuit? Patricia tried to frame herself as the hero. She printed newsletters, called for special votes, even posted on Nextdoor under a burner account claiming Eli was housing multiple bears and training them to be aggressive deterrents. But the neighborhood wasn't buying it. When a young couple from Maple Avenue hung a banner reading, "We stand with Ursa," across their front lawn, Patricia ordered a citation for unauthorized signage. It was ignored. Then came the rally, organized by the community's unofficial mayor, Mr. Alvarez, the same man Patricia once fined for planting sunflowers 2 inches from the sidewalk. A Saturday afternoon. 50 neighbors showed up. Kids wore bear hats. Adults brought signs. Someone baked cupcakes shaped like paw prints. It wasn't a protest. It was a celebration of something deeper, reclaiming their right to live without fear of arbitrary power. Eli didn't expect it. When he opened his door and saw the crowd on his lawn, his first instinct was to retreat. But then he noticed the chalk drawings on the sidewalk, the kids running around without worrying about citations, the smiles that weren't forced. They weren't celebrating the bear. They were celebrating the boundary, the one Eli had drawn and held. He stepped out onto the porch. Someone handed him a cupcake. Another handed him a handmade thank you card drawn in crayon. "Thank you for keeping us safe, Mr. Bearman." He smiled for the first time in days. But it wasn't over yet. Patricia's lawsuit still loomed. The court date was set, and Marisol had a plan. The courtroom wasn't grand. No marble pillars or polished oak benches. Just worn linoleum floors, flickering fluorescent lights, and the quiet hum of an old ceiling fan that seemed to sigh louder than the people inside. But for Eli, it might as well have been a battlefield. He sat beside Marisol at the defendant's table, wearing a navy blue collared shirt and calm in his posture. On the other side, Patricia Kessler sat with her lawyer, Donald Kent, a flashy attorney with cufflinks shaped like gavels and a voice that could fill an auditorium even when uninvited. Patricia wore her signature pastel cardigan, buttoned to the top, with a pearl necklace that had once belonged to her grandmother. Her lips were thin, her eyes watchful. But beneath the icy poise, she was pale, tense, fidgeting with the edge of a legal pad like she was drawing blood from the paper. Judge Nadine Russell took the bench, mid-50s, sharp-eyed, no nonsense. She began with a glance at both parties. "This case is not about wild animals or HOA policy," she said plainly. "It's about the law. Let's proceed." Kent stood first, delivering an opening statement that felt more like a TED Talk than a legal argument. He painted Eli as reckless, mysterious, and evasive, a solitary man who kept a bear in his basement, mere feet from where children play and families gather. And he called Patricia a concerned citizen, a steward of community values, and a woman who risked her safety for the greater good. It was rehearsed, it was passionate, and it was flimsy. Marisol rose slowly after he sat down, smoothing her blouse before speaking. "No theatrics, Your Honor," she said. "We're here to discuss facts." Then she gestured to the projector. On the screen, Patricia entering Eli's front door, uninvited, her hand on the knob, her feet crossing the threshold, her body disappearing down the stairs. No knocking, no announcement, no pause. The courtroom was silent. "Plaintiff claims she feared for her safety," Marisol continued, voice calm and clear, yet voluntarily entered a private residence and walked directly into a restricted enclosure. "That's not courage, that's trespassing." She handed over a binder to the judge. "Enclosed are permits issued by the state of Florida, USDA compliance reports, veterinary documentation, and signed affidavits from multiple experts, including one from Dr. Shapiro, a wildlife behaviorist. Eli Cross has operated within the law every single day he's lived in Aspen Falls. The same cannot be said of the plaintiff." Kent objected, but Judge Russell waved it off. Let's talk about the enclosure, Kent said later during cross. How can you claim this animal poses no risk? Eli answered directly. Because she's been trained, monitored, fed, sheltered. She doesn't roam, she doesn't roar. She naps under a cooling vent most of the day. The only threat Ursa posed was to Patricia's pride. A few quiet chuckles stirred in the courtroom. Do you think it's acceptable to house a bear where children live? Kent pressed. Eli didn't flinch. I think it's unacceptable for someone to enter a home uninvited and use children as justification for illegal behavior. Kent turned red. Patricia stared daggers. But Judge Russell only nodded. When Patricia took the stand, she was composed at first, stiff-backed, voice steady, like she'd practiced every word in front of her bathroom mirror. But under Marisol's questioning, the cracks appeared. You mentioned suspicious activity, Marisol said. What exactly did you witness? Patricia hesitated. Unusual noises, movement at night, a large shadow through the basement window. Did you report any of that to the police? No. Did you attempt to call Mr. Cross before entering his home? I didn't have his number. You're the HOA president. You have everyone's contact information. Patricia opened her mouth, then closed it. Her hands tightened on the arms of the witness chair. And you believed it was your duty to conduct an inspection alone? Marisol asked, her tone razor-sharp. Patricia nodded weakly. I've done it before. For code violations. For overgrown grass, perhaps. Not for unverified animal threats. Isn't it true, Ms. Kessler, that you acted not out of concern, but out of spite? Kent objected. Sustained. Marisol let it hang anyway. Nothing further. The trial lasted 4 hours. When Judge Russell returned from deliberation, her ruling was swift and clean. The court finds that Mr. Elias Cross was within his full legal rights at all times. His animal is licensed, his property compliant, and his behavior lawful. The same cannot be said for the plaintiff. The claim is dismissed. Furthermore, Ms. Kessler's actions constitute a violation of Florida's trespass statutes. Mr. Cross's counterclaim for unlawful entry and reputational harm will proceed. The gavel dropped with a final, satisfying thud. Patricia didn't speak. She didn't cry. She simply gathered her things with mechanical grace, avoiding eye contact with the gallery as she left the courtroom, her lawyer whispering frantically in her ear. Outside, Eli stood for a moment in the soft afternoon sunlight. No cameras, no reporters, just a few neighbors who'd come to watch. People who now saw him not as the guy with the bear, but as the man who'd stood his ground. One of them, Ms. Grayson, approached. You did good, she said, smiling gently. For all of us. Eli nodded. Emotion caught in his throat. And then came the text. From the sheriff. Looks like the HOA board is calling an emergency vote to remove her. About time. Eli smiled. He didn't respond. Because some victories didn't need applause. They just needed to happen. It didn't happen all at once. There was no parade, no announcement, no celebratory headline in the Aspen Falls newsletter. But the neighborhood began to change. Subtly, slowly. Like frost melting off a windshield 1 square inch at a time. The week after the verdict, Patricia Kessler resigned from the HOA board. The email came at midnight, unsigned, unceremonious. 1 sentence. Effective immediately, I resign my role as HOA president. Please direct all communications to the interim committee. No explanation, no farewell, no finger-pointing, just silence. And like a vacuum broken open, the neighborhood exhaled. For the first time in years, people left Halloween decorations up past the suggested removal date. Orange lights stayed strung across porches well into November. Someone even installed a fake graveyard in their front yard, complete with motion-activated zombies and a fog machine. No citation arrived. No warning letter showed up tucked under their doormat. Instead, neighbors started waving again. They lingered a little longer by mailboxes. The morning walks turned into sidewalk conversations. Kids chalked hopscotch patterns that stretched across driveways. Nobody told them to keep it down. On Willow Ridge, a couple who'd been fined 6 times in one summer for their lawn flamingo collection put out a full flock. Dozens of pink plastic birds peeking out from rose bushes and hedges like suburban flamingo graffiti. No one stopped them. Not anymore. At the center of it all was Eli. He didn't seek attention, didn't take credit. He still mowed his lawn every Sunday, still wore the same dark green flannel, still walked quietly from his mailbox to his front door, with the demeanor of someone used to solitude. But something had shifted. People greeted him first now. They nodded. They smiled. Some stopped to chat. One afternoon, a teenage boy named Connor, same kid Eli once saw riding his bike barefoot through a summer storm, knocked on his door. "I'm doing a school project on animal care," Connor mumbled. "My teacher said I could interview someone unique." Eli blinked, then stepped aside. "Come on in." Downstairs, Ursa was snoring softly in her enclosure, one massive paw draped over a pile of straw like she owned the room, which, truthfully, she kind of did. Connor watched her for a while, scribbling notes furiously, until finally asking, "She ever get mad?" Eli chuckled. "Only when I try to wake her up early." He paused. "She's peaceful, as long as people don't corner her." The kid nodded slowly, as if he understood more than he let on. Later that week, a woman named Cynthia Alvarez, once fined by Patricia for hosting an unsanctioned garden brunch, invited Eli to the neighborhood's first official community potluck in years. He almost declined. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the handwritten invitation. Maybe it was the bear paw doodle in the corner of the card that made him laugh out loud. Or maybe it was just time. When he showed up, with Ursa staying home, of course, he didn't stand alone in the corner. He was welcomed. Someone handed him a plate. Another offered him lemonade. And when a neighbor raised a toast to those brave enough to stand still when everyone else runs, no one had to guess who they meant. He didn't wave. He didn't nod. He just smiled. Later, on his way home, he found a small rock placed near his mailbox, painted with the words, "Thank you for protecting more than just your bear." He didn't know who left it. He didn't need to.